Welcome to the Sixth Wheels Consulting Podcast, dialoguing disability and discussing difference, inclusion, and all abilities in today's world. Now here are your hosts, Matthew Shapiro and Bob Nolly.
Well, hey there. It is so good to see you again. This is Bob Nolly with my good buddy and host, Matthew Shapiro. Welcome to the Sixth Wheels Consulting Disability Podcast. Matthew, how are you?
I'm great, Bob. I'm great. This is always good to spend some time with you and talk about the latest issues as it surrounds disability in our lovely world that we live in.
Yeah, that's what we try and do. And, the folks are telling us we should keep doing this, so we're going to keep doing this.
That's right.
Realize, though, folks, we could choose to talk about something else.
No, I like this topic.
I think so, too. I mean, you're the host. You can decide.
Yes.
We'll get into the holidays. I'm sure there'll be lots of issues we want to talk about there as well, too. Hey, guess what?
What's that?
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Why is that? I love that segue. That's great.
You know where that's from?
What movie is that from? Oh, is that Top Gun?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's incorrect. That's not the correct answer. So no.
I feel like
people online are screaming at you now. They're screaming the answer out.
I know.
It's from the movie Network.
What's that? I've never heard of that movie.
We'll do a little IMDb work later. Network. Now I can't even. I've just had a total brain cramp. I can't even come up with the actor that said it. He's passed away. He's a network newscaster, and he's upset about the way the news is being delivered every night. Because back then, you got your news two ways. You got it from print, from the daily newspapers.
Sure.
Or you got it from people like Walter Cronkite on the network nightly news. You found the guy you liked the most on one of only 3 channels.
Right.
That's how you got your news. And he played a character that delivered the network news that just blew a gasket. And I think it was an Oscar nominated. I don't know if he won for that or not.
Sure.
That was the trigger. He said, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. And guess what I found? People with disabilities are protesting like hell.
I wonder why that would fit in with our podcast.
Listen,
covered that.
Disability advocate Elisa Grishman says this. My disability is not something wrong with me. It's that the world has not adapted to me. Wow.
Bob, it's like she's been listening to our podcast.
Thanks. I hope she hit the subscribe button like everybody else should too, because we need everyone.
Yes, we do.
This is out of the Huffington Post. In cities across America, people with disabilities face uneven access to buildings. Well, that's kind of an understatement, uneven access. Transportation, you've talked about that, and leisure activities. Change isn't coming fast enough, and activists worry that lawmakers are in the process of watering down the protections that do exist. Hey, you do lobbying work. Do you find that to be the case?
I not me as a lobbyist, because I want to keep as many disability rights legislation. I want to keep as much disability rights legislation in place as I possibly can. But I can certainly agree with that argument that I think our dear friends in D.C. sometimes are trying to do whatever they have to do to roll back some of the protections that are in the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And you're very active here in Richmond. Lisa, she is active in Pittsburgh, where she writes, accessibility is mediocre at best, and she attests to the city's problems. She uses a wheelchair and a walker, pushes for improvements to the city's sidewalks and local businesses. There it is. And she urges local politicians to not get complacent about leaving the status quo. This is a quote from her. The city has not been changing at an appreciable rate. She's a resident of Pittsburgh's uptown neighborhood. She says, one of the things she's done countless times is the longer you live, the more likely it is that you'll become disabled at some point. All right, folks, think about that for a moment. The longer you live, the more likely it is that you'll become disabled at some point. Everyone from homeless veterans to Donald Trump, that's a quote, she names him himself, anyone can become disabled at any point. And if we just thought in those terms, she doesn't think she'd have to be out doing all this activist work. Last year, she quotes a Valetti Hub analysis of the best and worst places for people with disabilities. and ranked Pittsburgh 53rd out of the country's 150 most populous cities, a rating that even worse than it appears to her, because she earned a dismal, Pittsburgh earned a dismal 52 points out of 100 total points. And even the highest scoring cities, not many were lower than 62 points. So in that tool, it gets complicated there.
Well, and it's interesting because Alicia, in the article that you're referencing, it talks about a lot of the things that we are trying to address on this podcast. And I think a lot of her points of how the politicians are moving slow and, progress is moving slow. I was just in Pittsburgh earlier this year, and, it's a tougher city to navigate. It is, there are some challenges to it. And I think her overall point is that we need to globally change faster around disability work and around disability in our culture. We've talked on that topic a number of times on this podcast, but it's so funny because we keep finding these articles and these different stories that just keep kind of going back to that overall topic of making society more fully inclusive and open-minded to people like Alicia and myself and other people with disabilities. And we're seeing it in states all across this country. So, I am mad as hell too, because to steal the title of the headline, because why have we not seen significant progress in some of these areas that Alicia talks about in the article, and that I, have hopefully addressed here on the podcast? And why is it that the disability population has to continue to struggle and continue to fight for things that, quite frankly, shouldn't have to be fought for, like full access and curb cuts that actually work and other things like that? Why is that the case? And why do we continue to see challenges that are the same challenges I talked about 10 years ago? And that does make me mad as hell, so to speak, and just again steal the title of the article.
That's great, because Grishman, who is now 35, I believe, she's the founder of a local advocacy group, and she called it the Access Mob. I love that name. And it works around the ADA's enforcement shortcomings by getting Pittsburgh business owners to voluntarily make ADA compliant changes. She does this by convincing them that accessibility is better for their bottom line. Does that sound familiar?
I was just going to say, Bob, where have we heard that before?
And tell everybody where they've heard that before.
Yes. So as I've stated a number of times, I think when we talked about, and what the work Alicia is trying to do sounds very familiar to my, for those of you that have been longtime listeners, we recently had an episode earlier this year about my disability, my Six Wheels Consulting Certification Program. And one of the things that we talked about on that episode is how if you make things more accessible and inclusive, it's going to help your bottom line as a business owner. People with disabilities have $220 billion in discretionary income, but because our society is not set up in a way that can allow us to experience and gain access to all of those things, they're not spending the money because it's not inclusive. And so it just makes my heart feel warm and fuzzy that we've got other people across this country like Alicia trying to make changes, but I think it's going to take all of us. And it is a mindset shift that we have to take as a society. And frankly, it's really not that hard, and we really just need more people to join us in the fight and be willing to make the adequate changes to allow things to be more inclusive.
I love this part here where it talks about she tends to favor more subtle methods of advocacy at home, but she isn't afraid to make a noise when necessary. She's been arrested 5 times for protest as a member of ADAPT, a national disability rights organization. quote, she says she self-describes herself, I'm a lover and a fighter.
And frankly, that's how I would describe myself. I'll say I've never been arrested. I know a lot of people who are part of the great ADAPT movement, but I would almost argue that I think we could get more flies with honey than we could with vinegar, kind of thing. And so I've never really gone the ADAPT route. I'm really trying to go the education route and the route of, if you it's kind of the if you build it they will come model from our Field of Dreams for those that remember Field of Dreams. But I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take to really see a significant change in accessibility, inclusion, in overall mindset, because a lot of what she talks about in this article is, you're seeing more representations of disability on like our TV shows, with shows like The Good Doctor and Glee and Speechless. But that's not, it's translating into our entertainment world, but it's not translating into our world overall to where there aren't barriers to life. And why is that the case? And why is everything so slow moving? If I could crack that code, I'd be a very, very rich man, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. Pittsburgh is not the same kind of place that the RVA is here. But she says some parts of Pittsburgh are good and some are not. She said it's hard with a wheelchair because Pittsburgh, if you don't know this, it's really hilly. And she has a motorized chair, and she knows people that have unmotorized chairs that are manual that switch to motorized when they have to deal with the hills. One thing that I found kind of interesting, she said that in the city, sidewalks are the property of the homeowner. And because they're responsible for the repairs. And that causes a lot of problems because reporting it is a hassle. And then getting people to come out and fix it is a hassle. And some property owners, homeowners, can't afford to fix it. And, she doesn't report things in front of houses where it looks like the owners couldn't afford to make the repairs. And she would, suggest she would happily pay more in property taxes to have the city own the sidewalks. Well, that would be a tremendous part of it.
It's funny.
She talks about her parents' own houses. Her parents live in New Jersey, apparently, as well. And that's interesting because, yes, Richmond and Pittsburgh are two very different places, but there are a lot of transplanted Pittsburgh people in town. If you go out to a pub on a Sunday afternoon, there are lots of Steelers fans meeting together and gathering to cheer on. They're not just because they like the Steelers, but because they came from the Pittsburgh area.
Well, and it's so funny that you talk about who's responsible for the sidewalks, because in a lot of areas, including downtown Richmond and a lot of other areas, I've heard rather frequently from a lot of people in a lot of areas that there's a ton of finger pointing. And the city says it's their responsibility, but the locality says it's theirs. And or the locality thinks it's the city's responsibility, and the city thinks it's the locality's responsibility, or the individual's responsibility. And so ultimately what ends up happening is nothing gets done, right? Because the can gets kicked down the road and nothing gets done. And then, we were really fortunate enough at VCU, where I graduated from, they finally ended up fixing all the sidewalks. But the only reason they did that, Bob, was because we were fortunate enough to have a bike race here in Richmond probably 3 or 4 years ago. And so they wanted to look all good and fancy for the bike race. And so they finally ended up fixing the sidewalks. Now, why that took so long is a whole other question in itself, and why it took a bike race in order to make the sidewalks accessible and not doing what's right for people with disabilities is interesting to me.
It's interesting. I'm just having another conversation about that same bike race and the fact that if you come up Interstate 95, and if you don't know, 95 is the big north-south connector that runs along the East Coast. And as you cross the James River here in town and enter town, you go by 95, there's this huge I don't happen to come into the town that way. It's very rare. But this huge display of welcome to Richmond, and it's the background. It's like a big sign that's built into this hill, this mound there. And it's like, as you're on the road, it looks like it's 3 stories high. And it gives the impression, wow, what a hip city. This is very cool. We've got everything together here. When I look at that, and my first thought was, who paid for this? And apparently, businesses were compelled, I guess, to come together to make that happen. And it's a positive statement. I mean, it looks good. But when I think about things like the sidewalks, I went, the bike race.
Why couldn't we be compelled, or why couldn't we come up with another way to make the sidewalks more accessible for all, rather than why did the initiative have to be a bike race, if that makes sense?
I think it becomes just a platform, a rallying point to get people to turn their eyes toward, not necessarily to contribute or to engage a conversation, but all of a sudden they become more aware. It's like the communication channel is opened. It's broader. The bandwidth has been increased. And right in that moment, you have an opportunity to shove your message through it. Sure. And, lots of folks did that as well. A third point related to the bike race. We didn't intend to go down this road, but here we are.
But it's connected. So I think
it certainly is. Somebody that was here in town that had, bikes are expensive things. Bikes can be very expensive things.
It's 8 o'clock.
Somebody was sitting in a very nice restaurant in one of the pubs up in the Carytown area, and somebody stole their bike. And I went, what a great message to get sent out through the international media here that this athlete had their bike stolen.
I remember that story.
Lead against that. And they found the bike and it was returned, and we never heard what happened to the person that stole it, which is probably a good thing. But so there we have 3 things that have a whole different perspectives on that. I would love to be able to invite Elisa Grishman on, but I don't know if I could escape the mushroom cloud that would happen if we get her on here. I'm going to invite her though.
Yeah, we should do that. I would love to. The goal with this podcast is to have dialogues with as many different people in the field, and maybe she and I can share some horror stories about some of the challenges that we face. Not only she faces in Pittsburgh, but I face here in Virginia and nationwide. Because I think a lot of the issues that she talks about in this article are nationwide issues. And again, I'm mad as hell, and like we need to do things to make the world better.
Yeah, indeed. We talked about the comparison. Now I can loop back. The comparison between Richmond and Pittsburgh. We talked about the Pittsburgh sidewalks. She says, on the other hand, Pittsburgh has a really good paratransit system. How would you rate the one we have here? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Not great. We have the Pulse Bus, but it's not there. There's some accessibility. I've ridden it, and the ride is a great experience, but the wayfinding experience is not accessible to the stations. There's not good signage, and so the ride itself is really, really great and really, really easy. But the wayfinding to get to the stations to take the ride is a challenge. We don't have taxis very much. There's not a lot of accessible transportation options, and the ones that I have used have gotten me late to locations on many different opportunities, and so very rarely do I use public transportation in our great city.
Well, okay, enough said there. I'll let that be the last word. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to episode 18 of the Six Wheels Consulting Disability Podcast. For my friend and host, Matthew Shapiro, this is Bob Nolly. Keep thinking inclusion.
And everyone, please check us out on social media. The podcast is all over on all different platforms. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so let's make that the parting shot too. Please find us on the Six Wheels Consulting Facebook page.
On our Twitter page. We're also, the podcast itself is all over Podbean, SoundCloud, Stitcher. We're on. We are on Spotify. We're everywhere. So there's lots of iTunes is our big one.
Nice piece of marketing. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, give us
if you go to Apple Podcasts on iTunes and leave us a nice review, and we'll give you a shout out on the show. All right. We love to hear from you. Absolutely. Once again, everybody, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. See you, Matthew.
Bye, Bob. Thanks.